"I'm not who you think," she warned, and when the mountain man saw her scars, he froze. In the middle of a deadly winter storm, a lone trapper drags a half-frozen woman into his cabin. By lamplight, he sees her face and realizes she carries more than scars. She carries secrets that could burn an entire town to the ground. Out on the dusty street, hooves thunder. Men are hunting her. They say she belongs to a powerful rancher. But hidden in her shawl is a deed to land. With water every soul in the valley would kill to control. Whispers spread in the church pews. Keys rattle in the jail. The bell tolls as the town turns against her, not just for her scars, but for the blood in her veins. One mountain man must decide, protect her or save himself. But if he chooses her, he'll stand against guns, greed, and the weight of prejudice itself. What truth lies behind her scars? And will his courage be enough when the entire frontier wants her gone? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The January wind howled through the pines as Donald Boone worked his way along the frozen creek, checking his trap lines. Fresh snow crunched beneath his boots while gray clouds gathered overhead, threatening another squall. His breath came out in white puffs as he moved with the quiet efficiency of a man who'd spent years in these mountains alone. The first flakes were starting to fall when he spotted something dark against the white landscape. Donald squinted through the thickening snow. A heap of cloth lay half buried near the water's edge. His heart quickened as he made out the shape of a person, moving. Faster now, Donald crossed the distance in long strides. It was a woman, her shawl frozen stiff as bark. Her skin had taken on a dangerous bluish tint. As he knelt beside her, her eyes fluttered open, revealing deep brown irises clouded with fear. "I'm not who you think," she whispered through cracked lips, her voice barely carrying over the wind. Donald's weathered face creased with concern. "Don't matter who you are. Can't leave you out here to freeze." Despite his misgivings about bringing a stranger to his sanctuary, he gathered her into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, like lifting a child. The storm was picking up force, now driving icy needles into his face as he trudged a quarter-mile back to his cabin. Inside, Donald laid her gently before the stone fireplace. He built up the flames quickly, feeding them dry pine until warmth began flooding the single room. As he worked, he caught glimpses of her face in the flickering light. Old burn scars traced paths across her skin like tributary streams on a map. Similar marks wrapped around her forearms where her sleeves had pulled back. "There's hot coffee," he offered, reaching for a tin cup. She shrank away from his outstretched hand. "I won't go to town," she said firmly, though her voice trembled. "Promise me you won't take me there." Donald studied her for a long moment. "Ain't my business where you're running from. You can stay till you're strong enough to walk." Relief softened her features. She accepted the coffee then, wrapping her fingers around the warm metal dot as evening settled in. Donald prepared a simple venison stew, the familiar motions allowing his mind to wander. The sight of those burn scars had awakened something in his memory. A night 20 years ago back in Kentucky. The neighbor's barn aflame, his little sister trapped inside. A brave girl had run into the inferno to save her. Though she'd succeeded in bringing his sister out, both girls had been badly burned. His sister hadn't survived the fever that followed. The woman by his fire dozed fitfully now, wrapped in his spare blanket. Donald watched her sleep, that old memory needling at him. Could this be the same girl? The timing would be right. She looked to be in her mid-20s. But what would bring her all the way out here, alone in the dead of winter? Outside, the storm reached its full fury. Wind screamed through the gaps in the log walls, while snow piled against the door. Donald added more wood to the fire, knowing they'd be trapped here until the weather cleared. His carefully maintained solitude had been breached by this mysterious woman who stirred echoes of his past. He'd lived alone in these mountains for over a decade, choosing isolation over the complications of human connection. But something about her presence tugged at him. Perhaps it was the old debt of gratitude he still carried, or simply the raw vulnerability beneath her guarded exterior. The stew bubbled softly on the cook fire. Donald stirred it mechanically, his thoughts circling back to his decision to bring her here. His instincts, honed by years of survival in this unforgiving country, warned him that this choice would ripple through his carefully ordered life like stones cast in still water. Yet watching her curled beside his hearth, he knew he couldn't have done differently. She murmured something in her sleep, words he couldn't make out, but the sound held such sadness it made his chest ache. Donald settled into his chair, resigned to his vigil. The storm could last for days up here. Whatever mysteries his unexpected guest carried, whatever changes her arrival might bring, they would have to wait until the weather cleared. For now, his duty was simple: keep her warm, keep her safe, and honor his word not to take her to town. The fire crackled steadily as night drew its dark curtain across the mountains. Donald pulled his coat tighter and prepared for a long watch, while the wind sang its wild songs around his cabin walls. Morning sunlight pierced through the narrow gaps between the cabin logs, painting thin golden lines across the wooden floor. Kim stirred beneath the wool blanket, her body stiff from sleeping on the hard planks. The first thing she saw was Donald, sitting in his chair, methodically drawing a whetstone along the blade of his hunting knife. Her heart jumped into her throat. The steady scraping sound reminded her too much of other mornings, other men with knives. She must have made some small sound because Donald's eyes flicked up to meet hers. "Just getting ready to slice the venison for breakfast," he said quietly, his voice gentle as if soothing a spooked horse. "Got some biscuits warming too." Kim pushed herself up slowly, keeping the blanket wrapped tight. The cabin was warm. He must have been up early to stoke the fire. The familiar scent of coffee drifted from the pot, hanging over the flames. "Thank you," she said, her voice still rough from sleep. "For everything." Donald nodded, returning to his work. Kim gathered her shawl around her shoulders, the motion causing it to slip. As she reached to adjust it, the morning light fell across her exposed arms, illuminating the web of scars that stretched from wrist to elbow. The scraping sound stopped abruptly. Kim looked up to find Donald staring at her marks with an expression she'd never seen before. Not the usual disgust or pity, but something closer to recognition. The knife lay forgotten in his lap. "Those burns," he said hoarsely. "I know where you got them." His eyes searched her face with new intensity. "Kim Whitmore?" The name hit her like a physical blow. She hadn't heard it spoken aloud in so long. "How did you ran into Murdoch's burning barn," Donald said. 20 years ago in Kentucky. You pulled my sister Sarah out." Kim's fingers clutched her shawl tighter. That night was seared into her memory as deeply as the scars on her skin. The crushing heat, the choking smoke, the terrified screams of the trapped girl. "I didn't know she was your sister." "She didn't make it through the fever that came after," Donald said softly. "But I never forgot what you did." An uncomfortable silence settled between them as Donald dished up breakfast. Kim picked at her food, while he watched her with questions burning in his eyes. "What brought you out here?" he finally asked. "Why were you half frozen in my creek?" Kim opened her mouth to answer, but the words stuck in her throat. How could she explain everything that had happened? Where would she even begin? Before she could find her voice, the Donald rose from the table. "Need to haul in more firewood before the next storm hits. We can talk later." Kim watched through the window as he worked, his broad shoulders straining as he split logs with practiced swings. The morning sun had risen higher, making the snow blindingly bright. A movement on the ridge caught her eye. Her blood turned too. Ice as she made out the shapes of riders moving along the crest. Even at this distance, she recognized the way the leader sat his horse. "Donald!" She hissed urgently through the partially open door. "There are men up there." He dropped the axe and stepped quickly into the shadows of the cabin. Together they watched the horsemen pass, their figures dark against the snow. Kim didn't breathe until they disappeared from view. "Those men," Donald said carefully. "They're looking for you?" Kim nodded, her hands trembling. "They won't stop until they find me." That evening, as the fire cast dancing shadows on the log walls, Kim finally found the courage to share part of her story. "After my parents died, a man named Clayton forced me to marry him. He bought the judge, made everything look legal on paper. But what he really wanted was my father's land grant." Her voice grew bitter. "There's water rights attached to it, valuable ones. When I found out what he planned to do with them, I took the deed and ran." Donald's weathered face was grim. "Man like that, with water rights at stake, he'll have powerful friends helping him hunt you down." "I know it's not fair to involve you in this," Kim said. "I should leave as soon as the weather clears." But Donald stared into the fire for a long moment. The years of solitude he built around himself like a wall were crumbling, and he knew why. He owed a debt to this woman, not just for his sister, but for the basic human dignity Clayton had stolen from her. "No," he said finally. "You'll stay here until we figure something out. I've lived alone in these mountains a long time, but maybe that's been long enough." Kim looked at him with surprise and the first glimmer of hope she'd felt in months. Outside, snow began falling again, softly veiling the cabin in white. Morning brought a crisp clarity to the mountain air. Donald's axe rang against wood in steady rhythm, splitting logs for the growing woodpile. The sound echoed across the snow-covered clearing, mixing with the gentle crunch of Kim's footsteps as she worked nearby. She sat on a stump, skilled fingers moving deftly over the metal traps Donald had given her to mend. A sure handling of. The mechanism surprised him. Most folks would have struggled with the delicate springs and triggers. "My father taught me," she explained, catching his questioning glance. "Said everything useful deserved fixing, not throwing away." Her hands paused on a particularly worn trap. "These old ones just need some care to work right again." Donald nodded, understanding more than just her words. They fell into an easy pattern as the day stretched on. He brought in fresh rabbit and grouse, while she transformed them into hearty meals that filled the cabin with savory aromas he'd almost forgotten. While she worked at the cook stove, Kim hummed softly, sometimes hymns he recognized from childhood church meetings, others unfamiliar but haunting in their melody. The sound stirred something deep in his memory. Sarah used to hum like that while helping their mother with chores. His chest tightened at the thought. Evening drew in early, as it always did in winter. They sat in comfortable silence by lamplight, the flame casting warm shadows on the log walls. Kim had discovered his small shelf of books and was carefully turning the pages of his Bible, pausing at the notes scribbled in margins. "You've studied this deeply," she said, touching one of his annotations with gentle fingers. "Helps me think clearer," Donald replied. "Reminds me there's more than just survival out here." He hesitated, then asked the question that had nagged him since finding her. "That first night you said, 'I'm not who you think.' What did you mean by that?" Kim's hands stilled on the Bible. In the lamplight, he could see tears gathering in her eyes, though she tried to blink them away. "My mother was Cherokee," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've hidden it most of my life, tried to pass as only white, but..." She touched the scars on her face. "Between this and my blood, people see reasons to hate, to fear." Donald watched her, seeing the weight of years of hiding, of shame forced upon her by others' prejudice. "Your mother's people," They have wisdom about these mountains that goes back generations. Nothing there to fear or hate. A tear slipped down Kim's cheek. You're the first person besides my father to say something like that. Before Donald could respond, a sound froze them both. Hoofbeats, muffled by snow, but drawing closer. It moved quickly, extinguishing the lamp while Kim pressed herself against the wall beside the window. Donald peered out into the darkness. Shadows moved against the starlit snow, riders circling his cabin at a distance. Their horses' breath steamed in the cold air as they searched the area methodically. They won't give up, Kim whispered, her voice shaking. Clayton and his men, they'll keep hunting until they find the deed and destroy it. Those water rights would let them control the whole valley. Her hands clutched at her skirts where Donald suspected the precious document was hidden. He gripped his rifle, feeling the familiar smooth wood beneath his calloused hands. For 15 years, this cabin had been his retreat from the world. A place where the past couldn't touch him. Now it had become a fortress, sheltering secrets that powerful men wanted buried. The riders moved closer, their horses' hooves crunching in the crusty snow. Donald's finger rested near the trigger, though. He knew firing would only bring more trouble. Besides him, Kim barely breathed, her body tense as a drawn bowstring. Minutes stretched like hours until finally the sounds began to fade, moving down the valley. But Donald kept watching, knowing they would return. His solitary life among these peaks had changed the moment he found Kim in the snow. Now his cabin held not just his own fate, but hers as well, and the justice she sought for an entire valley's future. When he finally stepped back from the window, Kim had rekindled a small flame in the stove, just enough to push back the darkness. The warm light caught the tears on her face, but her eyes held determination alongside the fear. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I never meant to bring this trouble to your door." Donald shook his head, settling his rifle across his knees as he took up watch again. Trouble finds its own way. Least now we face it together. Dawn painted the snow-laden branches in soft pink and gold. Donald led his horse from the lean-to, checking the cinch with practiced hands. The animal's breath steamed in the crisp morning air as he secured their few supplies in the saddlebags. Kim emerged from the cabin, wrapped in an extra wool coat he had given her. Her eyes were alert, scanning the tree line as she had learned to do these past days. Donald helped her mount, then swung up behind her. The horses' hooves crunched softly in the snow as they set out through the white-dusted pines. They rode in. Silence, Donald guiding them along hidden paths between the trees. After an hour, he dismounted and helped Kim down beside a rocky outcrop. Behind a curtain of snow-heavy branches stood a small springhouse made of stacked stone, its entrance nearly invisible unless you knew where to look. "Found this years back," Donald whispered, leading her inside. The space was tight but dry, with a narrow bench along one wall. Mountain folk used it to keep milk cool in summer. Safer than the cabin right now. They settled in to wait, listening. Kim studied Donald's face in the dim light, filtering through the door cracks. His patience surprised her. There was no restless movement, no nervous energy. He sat as still as the stones around them, ready but calm. The sound came slowly at first, distant hoofbeats growing closer. Kim held her breath as riders passed. On the trail below their hiding place, through gaps in the stone wall, she caught glimpses of armed men scanning the hillside. Donald's hand rested reassuringly on his rifle, but his expression remained steady. Only when the last echo of horses faded did Donald speak. "We can't keep hiding. Those men won't stop searching these hills." He turned to face her fully. "We need to ride down to town, get the law involved proper-like. That deed needs recording at the courthouse to make it legal and binding." Kim's fingers clutched at her skirts where the precious document was hidden. "The townspeople," she started, then swallowed hard. They won't take kindly to someone like me claiming water rights. You're your father's rightful heir, Donald said firmly. The law is the law, no matter what folks think about your mother's people. You deserve protection under it, same as anyone. His conviction stirred something in Kim's heart, a hope she had almost forgotten could exist. Still, fear lingered. What if Clayton's influence reaches the sheriff too? Then we'll find someone honest to help, Donald replied. Can't be everyone's in his pocket. They waited another hour to be sure the search party was gone, then returned to the cabin. Donald packed efficiently. Jerky, blankets, coffee, ammunition. Kim added the few possessions she had carried in her escape. A small medicine pouch of her mother's herbs. A worn photograph of her parents. By mid-morning, they were on the trail again. Snow began falling in earnest, thick flakes catching on their shoulders and the horse's mane. The temperature dropped as clouds darkened the sky. Donald kept them moving steadily downslope, but the weather forced them to make camp earlier than planned. They found shelter beneath a thick canopy of pine boughs. While Donald set snares in the gathering dusk, Kim carefully built a small fire, shielding it from view with a blanket hung between branches. The flames cast dancing shadows as they shared a simple meal of jerky and the last cornbread from the cabin. Night settled deep around them. Kim wrapped herself in blankets near the fire's warmth, memories of other winters rising unbidden. Without conscious thought, she began to sing softly, a Cherokee lullaby her mother had sung on cold nights like this, about stars guiding loved ones home. The melody drifted through the darkness. When she finished, she heard Donald clear his throat roughly. In the firelight, she saw tears on his weathered cheeks, though he tried to hide them. "Thank you," he said hoarsely. "Been a long time since I heard music up here." Kim touched the frayed edge of her shawl. "I haven't sung since we buried my mother," she admitted quietly. "She taught me that song when I was small, said it was a gift from her grandmother." Donald added another small branch to their fire. Gifts like that ought to be remembered, kept alive. They sat in companionable silence as the fire burned low. Though danger still waited on the trail ahead, Kim felt stronger knowing she no longer faced it alone. This quiet mountain man with his steady courage had become more than just a reluctant protector. He was becoming a friend she could trust with both her fears and her hopes. The snow continued falling softly around their sheltered camp, and somewhere in the darkness, an owl called. Once, twice, then silence returned to the sleeping forest. After 2 grueling days on mountain trails, Donald guided his horse around the last bend. Silverton spread below them, its collection of wooden buildings, and mine head frames nestled against towering peaks. Smoke rose from chimneys into the crisp winter air, and the distant clang of the mill echoed off the canyon walls. Kim tensed against him as they approached the town's outskirts. Her hands gripped the saddle horn tightly, knuckles white beneath. Her worn gloves. Donald understood her fear. After weeks in the isolated high country, the bustle of even a small mining town felt overwhelming. "We'll start at the livery," he said quietly. "Get the horse settled, then find you proper lodging." The livery stable smelled of hay and leather. The stable boy took them out without question, though his eyes lingered curiously on Kim's shawl-draped figure. Donald gathered their meager belongings and led her back onto the muddy street. "Widow Hawley runs the cleanest boarding house in town," he explained, steering them toward a 2-story building with neat curtains in the windows. "Known her some years. She's got a good heart." The widow met them at the door, her gray hair tucked precisely beneath a lace cap. Her sharp eyes took in Kim's travel-worn appearance and the careful way she held herself. When Kim's shawl slipped, revealing the scars that traced her neck, Margaret Hale's expression softened with compassion. "Land's sake, child, you look half frozen," she said, ushering them inside. "Let's get you settled with a warm bed and hot tea." Donald watched as the widow guided Kim upstairs, their footsteps creaking on old boards. When Margaret returned, her face was serious. "That girl's been through something fierce," she said quietly. "She'll be safe here, Mr. Boone. I keep a shotgun and ain't afraid to use it." Donald nodded gratefully. "Much obliged, Mom. There's more to sort out, but first she needs rest." He hesitated, then added, "I heard tell the preacher lets folks air their grievances after Sunday service." "That he does. Helps keep peace when everyone can speak their piece proper, like with witnesses." "Reckon we'll attend then," Donald said. He glanced upstairs. "Kim's got rights needs speaking for." Later, as evening settled over the town, Donald joined the boarding house supper table. Kim sat quietly beside him, barely touching her stew as conversation swirled around them. The other boarders, mostly miners and clerks, shared the day's news. Between bites of fresh bread, one name surfaced repeatedly: Ezekiel Shaw. The rancher's influence colored every topic, from water rights to store credit to who got work at the mines. Donald noticed how Kim's shoulders stiffened at each mention of Shaw's name. When the talk turned to Shaw's latest land acquisition, Kim's hand found Donald's arm under the table. She leaned close, her whisper barely audible. "That's him. The one who's trying to steal my father's property. The water rights he wants so badly." Donald gave a slight nod, warning her with his eyes to say no more. "Best keep quiet till we file your proof," he murmured back. "Walls have ears in town." After supper, Kim retired to her small rented room. Through the thin door, Donald heard her soft prayers, a mix of English and Cherokee words asking for courage. He positioned himself in the hallway chair, rifle across his knees as darkness fell. Movement in the street caught his eye. 2 riders lounged against hitching posts across the way, their attention fixed on Kim's window. Even in the gathering gloom, Donald recognized Shaw's brand on their horses. He checked his rifle's action, working the lever smoothly and quietly. The familiar feel of the weapon steadied him. Hour after hour, he maintained his vigil, watching Shaw's men watch the window. His thoughts turned to Kim's prayers, adding his own silent petition for wisdom and strength. The night deepened. Somewhere, a dog barked and boots scraped on wooden walkways. But Donald didn't move from his post. He had led Kim into town seeking justice, and he meant to see she got it. Until then, he would guard her rest, his rifle ready, while Shaw's men kept their dark surveillance under the winter stars in her room. Kim's lamp burned low. Donald heard her turn restlessly in the narrow bed, perhaps sensing the tension that hung over the sleeping town. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but for now, his task was simple: keep her safe through the long night hours until dawn. The Sunday morning bells of Silverton's First Church rang clear and bright across the snow-dusted town. Donald adjusted his worn but freshly brushed coat as he and Kim climbed the wooden steps. She had borrowed a plain dress from Widow Hall, though her shawl still wrapped her shoulders, offering familiar comfort. The church door creaked as they entered. Warm lamplight from brass fixtures illuminated the simple sanctuary. Donald felt Kim's slight hesitation as heads turned toward them. Several women offered gentle smiles, their faces kind beneath their Sunday bonnets. But as Kim moved into the light, whispers rustled through the pews like wind through dry leaves. Donald heard the harsh undertones when her heritage and scars became visible. They settled into a pew near the middle, hymnal pages rustling around them. Kim's fingers twisted in her lap as more townspeople filed in. Donald noticed how she held herself straight despite the stares, dignity in every line of her posture. The service proceeded with familiar rhythms, hymns, prayers, scripture. When time came for announcements and community matters, Donald drew a deep breath and stood. The floorboards creaked under his boots as he moved to the front. "Folks," he began, his voice carrying clearly in the hushed sanctuary. "I've brought someone you need to hear. This here is Kim Whitmore. She carries her father's rightful deed to land with a spring that feeds half the South Valley." A scatter of applause broke out, mostly from the poorer farmers who understood the value of water rights. But darker mutters rose from others when Kim stood, her Cherokee features more apparent in the morning light. "Half-breed," someone hissed. "And natural." The preacher raised his hands, uncertainty crossing his face. "Please, let us have silence and order." Kim's hands shook slightly as she unfolded the deed, but her voice rang steady and clear as she read, "This document hereby grants and bequeaths to Joseph Whitmore and his heirs in perpetuity the land and water rights herein described." A sharp scrape of boots on wood cut through her words. Ezekiel Shaw rose from the back pew, his fancy vest gleaming with a gold watch chain. His handsome features twisted into a sneer as he strode forward. "That woman is a liar," he declared. "She's my lawful wife, run away with stolen papers. I demand she be returned to my custody." Gasps rippled through the congregation. Women clutched their prayer books while men shifted uncomfortably. But Donald moved with deliberate calm, placing himself between Shaw and Kim. His voice carried the quiet strength of mountain streams when he spoke. "That's false, Shaw. You forced her into a sham marriage after her parents died, trying to steal land that's rightfully hers. You've got no claim on her or the spring." The preacher's face had gone pale. He gripped his pulpit, glancing between the opposing parties. Perhaps we should adjourn and seek proper legal counsel. This is a matter beyond church authority. The law is clear enough," Shaw spat. "A wife's property belongs to her husband." "I never freely consented," Kim's voice rang out. "You threatened me when I was alone and grieving. That's no true marriage before God or man." The congregation stirred uneasily. Some women nodded in understanding, while others whispered behind their hands. The preacher raised his voice over the growing murmur. "Friends, please, let us part in peace and seek resolution through proper channels. We are a community under the Lord's guidance." As the congregation began to disperse, several townspeople approached Kim. A weather-beaten farmer's wife pressed her hand warmly. "My Sophie knew your mama years back. She was a fine woman, Cherokee or no. You come by for tea if you've a mind." Others offered similar tentative kindnesses. A shopkeeper's shy daughter, an elderly miner who remembered Kim's father. But Shaw's cold voice cut through their words like a knife. "This isn't finished," he promised, eyes glittering. "That land will be mine, one way or another." He stalked out, spurs ringing on the wooden steps. But Donald noticed how several respected. Townsfolk deliberately turned their backs on Shaw's departure. Kim stood straighter, drawing strength from the small gestures of support around her. The morning sun streamed through the church's simple windows, catching the dust motes stirred up by the departing congregation. In that light, Donald saw both the fear and determination in Kim's face as she carefully folded her father's deed and tucked it away, ready to face whatever came. Next stop, morning sunlight glinted off fresh snow as Donald and Kim made their way down Silverton's Main Street toward the county clerk's office. Their boots crunched on the wooden sidewalk, still crusted with frost despite the warming day. The clerk's office occupied a narrow building wedged between the general store and telegraph office, its windows clouded with dust on inside. The pot-bellied stove barely touched the chill. Behind a scratched desk, the clerk, a thin man named Morris, with ink-stained fingers shuffled papers nervously when they entered. His eyes darted between them and the window as Donald explained their business. "We need this deed recorded properly," Donald said, as Kim carefully unfolded the document. "Its rightful inheritance, witnessed and notarized." Morris adjusted his spectacles with trembling hands. I "I can make a copy for safekeeping," he stammered, "but official recording will require a hearing, given the circumstances." Kim stepped forward, her voice steady despite the clerk's obvious discomfort. "What circumstances? The deed is legal and clear." "There are concerns." Morris wiped his forehead with a handkerchief. "Mr. Shaw has filed certain objections. Claims of marriage rights, questions about inheritance validity." Through the window, Donald caught sight of Shaw himself, lounging against a hitching post across the street. The rancher's satisfied smile made Donald's jaw clench. "We'll proceed," Kim insisted, laying the deed on the desk. "Make your copy. We'll face whatever hearing is needed." Morris's hand shook as he carefully transcribed the document. Donald watched him note every detail, from the land boundaries to the water rights clearly spelled out. When finished, the clerk handed back the original with obvious relief. "The hearing will be scheduled," he muttered. "You'll receive notice." As they left the office, Shaw's laughter followed them down the street. Donald felt Kim's shoulders stiffen, but she kept walking, head high. That evening, savory aromas filled the boarding house kitchen. Kim stood at the heavy iron stove, stirring a pot of rabbit stew. She had offered to cook for the house, and Widow Hollow had gladly accepted, watching with approval as Kim added dumplings to the bubbling pot. The boarding house residents gathered. Around the long table, a retired schoolteacher, 2 minors, a young telegraph operator, and Donald. As bowls were passed, appreciative murmurs rose. The widow beamed at the harmony of her usually fractious household. "This reminds me of my mother's cooking," the telegraph operator said softly. "In a long time since I tasted anything so good." Donald allowed himself a small smile, watching Kim move among them, refilling bowls, offering cornbread. Her quiet grace was winning them over, helping them see past scars and prejudice to her genuine kindness. After the others had gone to their rooms, Donald and Kim sat in the parlor. Lamplight cast soft shadows as they talked in low voices. The weight of memory pressed on Donald until he had to speak. "That day of the fire," he began roughly, "when you pulled my sister out, I never properly thanked you." Kim's hands stilled in her lap. "I often wondered if she survived." Donald's throat tightened. "She did for a time, but fever took her that winter, despite everything." He stared into the lamp's flame. "I've carried that guilt all these years. If I'd been faster, braver." Kim's hand covered his, warm and sure. "You were just a boy. But that girl's courage, the one who ran into flames to save a stranger, I see that same bravery in you now. You haven't lost it." Donald's fingers curled around hers, accepting the comfort she offered. The quiet moments stretched between them, full of unspoken understanding. A sudden thunder of hoofbeats shattered the peace. Shouts erupted outside, Shaw's name rising above the din. Donald leaped to his feet and rushed to the window. In the street below, riders gathered in a loose circle, torches casting wild shadows on the fresh snow. More men emerged from the saloon, joining the mob. "Shaw," someone yelled. "Shaw says it's time." Donald's hand went to his rifle, propped in the corner. The widow appeared in her nightdress, face pale in the lamplight. "Lord have mercy," she whispered. "They mean trouble." Through the window, Donald counted at least 15 mounted men, with more arriving. Their torches painted the night with savage orange light, turning the peaceful town street into a scene from hell. Shaw's men were done waiting. They had come to take matters into their own hands. Frost crackled on the window panes as first light crept over Silverton's snow-laden roofs. The boarding house stood silent but for the crunch of hoofbeats circling outside. Donald jerked awake at the sound, his rifle already in hand. Through gaps in the curtains, he counted riders, at least 20 men, their breath clouding in the pre-dawn chill. Shaw's voice carried clearly through the thin walls. "Surround the place. Nobody leaves." Donald moved swiftly down the hallway, boots silent on the worn floorboards. He rapped softly at Kim's door. She opened it immediately, fully dressed, the precious deed tucked inside her shirt. "They've got us boxed in," he whispered. Widow Holly appeared behind them in her nightdress, her gray hair loose around her shoulders. "The cellar," she said urgently. "There's a door that leads to the alley. Used to smuggle supplies during the war." They followed her down creaking stairs into the dank cellar. Coal dust tickled Donald's nose as the widow lifted a hidden trapdoor. Cold air rushed up from the narrow passage. "God be with you both," she whispered, pressing a small bundle of food into Kim's hands. Donald helped Kim down first, then squeezed through himself. The passage opened into a narrow alley behind the kitchen garden. Their horses, left ready in the widow's stable, nickered softly as Donald led them out. They mounted quickly, keeping to the shadows. Don was just touching the peaks as they urged their horses up the frozen trail leading into the hills. Behind them, angry shouts erupted. Their escape discovered. Hours passed as they pushed higher into the mountains. The horses labored through deep snow, their sides heaving. Near noon, Donald spotted a cave set back in a rocky outcrop. "We need rest," he said, noting Kim's exhausted slump in the saddle. The cave mouth was narrow but opened into a deeper chamber. Donald gathered pine boughs for bedding, while Kim started a tiny fire, just enough for warmth. They huddled close to the flames, sharing jerky from the widow's bundle. Kim's hands trembled as she ate. "I keep thinking about what they'll do to Margaret for helping us. She's respected in town," Donald assured her. "Even Shaw won't risk turning folks against them by harming her." Silence stretched between them. Finally, Kim spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "You know what terrifies me most? More than Shaw, more than these scars?" She touched her cheek. "It's being forgotten, treated as less than human because of my blood. My mother's people had a name for every star, every plant that heals, but to men like Shaw, we're nothing." Donald studied her face in the firelight. "You're the bravest soul I've ever known," he said roughly. "The day of that fire, you didn't see my sister as anything but someone who needed help. That's more human than most folks manage in a lifetime." Tears glinted in Kim's eyes, but she smiled faintly. They finished their meal in companionable silence. Exhaustion soon pulled them towards sleep. Though Donald kept his rifle close up by mid-morning, they were moving again. Snow began falling heavily, thick flakes limiting visibility. Their goal was Kim's mother's people, a small settlement where tribal elders might offer protection and support her claim. Evening shadows lengthened as they picked their way across a narrow ridge. The horses moved carefully on the treacherous ground. Donald's mount suddenly threw up its head, nostrils flaring. The first shot cracked out before Donald could shout a warning. Snow exploded beside Kim's horse as more bullets whined past. Dark figures rose from behind rocks. Shaw's men had been waiting. "Down!" Donald bellowed, yanking his rifle from its scabbard. Kim scrambled for cover behind a fallen log as he returned fire, his single-action Remington barking in the frozen air. Bullets thudded into snow and rock around them. Donald counted at least 6 attackers moving to surround them. He dropped one man with a clean shot, but the others kept coming. A cry made him spin around. 2 riders had circled behind them in the chaos. One seized Kim's arm, dragging her from cover. Donald lunged toward them, but something hard crashed against his skull. He sprawled face first in the snow, stunned through blurring vision. He saw Kim struggling as they bound her hands. "Donald!" She screamed. He tried to rise, but another blow drove him back down. Boot steps crunched closer. The last thing Donald saw was Kim being thrown across a saddle. Her face twisted in terror as consciousness slipped away into darkness. Consciousness returned slowly, like winter dawn creeping across frozen peaks. Donald's head throbbed where the rifle butt had struck. Blood had dried on his temple, crackling when he touched it. The world spun as he pushed himself to his knees in the trampled snow. His horse stood nearby, reins dragging in the powder. The loyal animal had stayed close instead of bolting. The rest of the ridge lay empty. No sign of Kim or Shaw's men remained, except churned snow and spent cartridge cases, glinting in the fading light. Donald's fingers trembled as he checked his pockets. They had taken his rifle, but left a small Bible he always carried. The pages were spotted with his blood now. He used the book's leather cover to wipe his face, then forced himself to stand up. The horse nickered softly as Donald grabbed the reins. Each movement sent spikes of pain through his skull, but he hauled himself into the saddle. The tracks leading away were clear enough, multiple horses heading west toward Shaw's ranch. He pressed his heels to the horse's flanks, following the trail. Hours passed as Donald rode through deepening shadows. The cold gnawed at him, making his wounds ache fiercer. Dark spots danced at the edges of his vision. When his horse stumbled on a hidden route, Donald nearly fell. He realized he could barely grip the reins anymore. Through blurring sight, he made out a small cabin tucked against the pines ahead. Smoke curled from the chimney into the purple dusk. Donald tried to guide his horse toward it, but darkness swept over him. He slumped forward, sliding from the saddle into deep snow. The next thing he knew, warmth touched his face. Donald's eyes fluttered open to find himself lying on a narrow cot beside a crackling fire. An elderly Cherokee man sat nearby, grinding herbs in a wooden bowl. "Be still," the man said, his voice gentle but firm. "That head wound needs tending." "Kim," Donald rasped. "I have to find her. You will die in the snow if you try now." The elder dipped a cloth in warm water and began cleaning Donald's temple. "I am called Eli. Rest here and regain your strength." Donald wanted to argue, but exhaustion dragged him back into darkness. He drifted in and out through the night, aware of Eli's quiet movements, the herb-scented poultices being changed on his wounds. Morning light filtered through the cabin's single window when Donald fully woke again. He sat up carefully, finding his head clearer. Eli handed him a cup of strong tea. "I knew Kim's mother," Eli said as Donald sipped the bitter brew. "Sarah was my niece. She married a white farmer, but never forgot our ways. Kim has her spirit." Donald's hands tightened around the cup. "Shaw took her. Means to force her into marriage." Eli nodded gravely. "I have heard of this man. He thinks scars make Kim less worthy. But among our people, scars are marks of survival, not shame. They show what we have overcome." "I failed to protect her," Donald said hoarsely. "No?" Eli's dark eyes held wisdom earned through years of loss and resilience. "You fought with honor, but now you must choose. Will you let vengeance guide you or justice?" Donald stared into the fire. "I want Shaw to pay for what he's done. Hatred will poison your spirit more surely than any wound." Eli added wood to the flames. "Kim needs your strength, not your rage." Over the next 2 days, Donald's body healed. Under Eli's care, the elder shared stories of Kim's mother, of Cherokee teachings about courage and dignity. Each evening, they prayed together, Donald with his worn Bible, Eli in his native tongue. Their words rose together, asking for wisdom and protection. On the morning of the 3rd day, Donald knelt beside his cot. "Lord," he whispered, "give me strength to do what's right. Help me save her with honor, not hatred." Miles away at Shaw's sprawling ranch house, Kim stood before a mirror in a white dress she had not chosen. Shaw's housekeeper had brought it that morning, along with a stern warning to cooperate. The dress felt like a burial shroud. Kim's fingers found the locket hanging beneath the high collar. the only piece of her mother she had left. Inside lay a tiny scrap of paper with a Cherokee prayer. "Creator," she whispered in her mother's language, "send deliverance. Let your light pierce this darkness." Shaw's boots echoed in the hallway outside her locked door. Kim clutched the locket tighter, her scarred fingers pressing the metal into her palm. She would not let fear break her spirit. Her mother's blood, her father's faith, and the memory of Donald's steadfast protection gave her strength to endure. Dawn painted the mountains gold as Eli emerged from his cabin carrying a bundle of clothes. He handed them to Donald, who stood testing his healing wounds. "These belong to my son," Eli said softly. "They will serve you better than your blood-stained gear." Donald accepted the offering with reverence. The clothes were simple but well made. Warm wool shirt, sturdy trousers, and a leather vest. As he changed, Eli wrapped fresh bandages around Donald's healing head wound. "The pain has eased some," Donald admitted, touching his temple gingerly. "Your body heals, but your spirit must. Be stronger still." Eli gestured to a dun-colored horse grazing nearby. "Take my spare mount. Your own needs rest after carrying you through the storm." Donald checked the horse's tack with careful hands. "I cannot repay such kindness. Show kindness to others. That is payment enough." Eli pressed a small leather pouch into Donald's hands. "Herbs for strength and a few coins. Shaw will expect you at church tomorrow. He will parade Kim before the town like a trophy, trying to make his theft seem righteous." Donald's jaw tightened. "I could end this tonight at his ranch and die under his men's guns, leaving Kim with no protector?" Eli shook his head. "No. The town must witness his evil and choose justice. Your weapon must be truth, not lead." They spent the morning planning. Eli knew which townsfolk secretly despised Shaw's growing power. He would visit them tonight, building quiet support. Donald would camp in the hills, conserving strength for tomorrow's confrontation. The ride toward Silverton was slow. Donald's wounds still ached, and the borrowed horse needed careful handling on the icy trails. To steady his thoughts, he recited psalms under his breath. "The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear?" Each verse gave him strength, reminding him that justice could prevail without bloodshed. By late afternoon, the town's church spire came into view, stark against gathering clouds. Donald made camp in a sheltered hollow overlooking Silverton. As darkness fell, he watched Eli's figure move between houses below. The elder's quiet diplomacy might mean the difference between victory and defeat tomorrow. The night deepened. Donald kept his vigil by a small fire, unable to sleep. Kim's voice echoed in his memory, her quiet hymns, her courage in telling her story. He thought of her scars, marks of sacrifice that Shaw saw as shame, but Eli called signs of survival. Donald pulled out his knife and whetstone. The steady scraping sound filled the darkness as he honed the blade to razor sharpness. Not for violence, he told himself, but readiness. Next, he cleaned his rifle with practiced care, though he prayed he would not need it. "Lord," he whispered, into the night, "guide my words tomorrow. Let truth be my shield." He knew Shaw would come to church with many armed men. Donald could not outfight them all. But perhaps with Eli's wisdom and the town's witness, he would not have to. Kim's deed was truth written on paper. Shaw's claim was built on lies and threats. The fire burned low as Donald kept watch. Tomorrow would bring either justice or ruin. He touched the fresh bandage on his head, remembering Eli's words about choosing honor over vengeance. The path ahead was narrow but clear. "The Lord is my strength and my shield," he murmured. "In him my heart trusts." Dawn was still hours away. Donald added wood to the fire and settled in to wait, watching the lights of Silverton below. Somewhere down there, Kim endured her captivity with the same quiet strength she had shown all her life. He would not fail her again. The church bells tolled across Silverton that Sunday morning, their bronze notes echoing off the snow-covered peaks. Townsfolk filed into the white clapboard building, stamping snow from their boots and settling into creaking wooden pews. Whispers rustled like dry leaves as Ezekiel Shaw made his entrance. He strode down the center aisle, forcing Kim along beside him. Her wrists bore faint bruises, partially hidden by the white lace of the wedding dress he had made her wear. The garment seemed to mock her dignity rather than celebrate it. Kim's eyes darted among the familiar faces, silently pleading for help, but most turned away. The preacher stood at his pulpit, fingers nervously shuffling papers. Sweat beaded on his forehead, despite the winter chill that seeped through the church's walls. Shaw had positioned his men strategically throughout the congregation, their presence as heavy as storm clouds dot as the preacher opened his Bible with trembling hands. The back door creaked open. Donald Boone stepped inside, his borrowed clothes clean, but his face still bearing the marks of violence. A collective gasp rippled through the pews. Women clutched their shawls tighter, and children twisted in their seats to stare. Shaw's hand moved toward his gun, but too many witnesses stayed his draw. His face darkened with rage as Donald made his way forward, each step measured and deliberate. Before Shaw could speak, Eli rose from his pew near the front. The Cherokee elder's voice carried clear and strong through the hushed church. "I knew Kim's mother," he declared. "She was Cherokee, yes, but more than that, she was a woman of faith and honor. Her daughter holds legal right to that land by blood and by law." "Lies," Shaw spat. "She's my wife, and that land is mine." Donald reached into his coat, movement slow and careful with his healing injuries. He withdrew a folded paper, the clerk's copy of the deed, preserved despite the ambush. "The truth is written here," he said, his quiet voice carrying to every corner. "Kim Whitmore is the rightful heir to her father's property. It's a forgery." Shaw roared, shoving Kim aside to stride toward Donald. But now widow Margaret Halley stood, her plain dress and stern countenance commanding attention. "I took Kim into my boarding house," she testified. "I saw the original deed with my own eyes. It bears her father's signature, witnessed and true." The county clerk rose next, his usual nervousness replaced by resolve. "I made that copy myself," he added. "The document is genuine." One by one, other townsfolk stood, merchants, farmers, miners, each adding their voice to Kim's defense. Eli had done his work well the night before, awakening their conscience and courage. "I've known Shaw's methods," declared a grizzled rancher. "Threatening folks, forging papers, stealing land. It's time someone stood against him." The preacher set down his Bible and descended from the pulpit, his steps growing more certain with each testimony. He moved to stand beside Kim, who remained straight-backed despite her tears. "Before God and this congregation," the preacher announced, his voice finding strength, "I declare Kim Whitmore the lawful owner of her inheritance. Mr. Shaw's claims are void, built on deceit and coercion." A moment of tense silence followed. Then someone began to clap. The sound spread like wildfire through the church, growing into a thunderous applause that shook dust from the rafters. Shaw's men looked uncertainly at their boss, then at the united congregation. One by one, they stepped away, unwilling to stand against the tide of public opinion. Shaw's face twisted with fury, but he could see his power crumbling before him. Kim broke free from where Shaw had pushed her, crossing the space between them with steady steps. She reached for Donald's outstretched hand, gripping it tightly as tears flowed freely down her scarred cheeks. These were not tears of shame or fear, but of relief and vindication. "You did it," she whispered, her fingers interlacing with Donald's. "We all did," Donald replied softly, including Eli and the whole congregation in his glance. Truth has a way of coming to light. Shaw stormed from the church, his boots echoing on the wooden floor. The heavy doors slammed behind him, and the sound seemed to break the last of his hold over the town. The tension drained from the air like a fever breaking, leaving behind a warm sense of justice restored. The church doors swung wide as townsfolk spilled onto the snow-covered street. Several men flanked Ezekiel Shaw, their stern faces and purposeful steps making their intent clear. Though Shaw's hand still hovered near his gun, the sight of so many determined citizens made him think better of it. He mounted his horse and rode away, leaving only kicked-up snow and muttered threats in his wake. Inside the church, Kim's strength finally gave out. Her knees buckled, and she collapsed against Donald's chest, the borrowed white dress crumpling between them. His arms circled her protectively, mindful of his healing wounds. "You're safe now," Donald murmured, his voice rough with emotion. "No, one's going to hurt you anymore." The preacher approached them, Bible clutched to his chest. "There'll need to be a proper hearing," he said, "but the town stands with you, Miss Whitmore. Your father's deed will be honored." Widow Margaret hurried forward with a shawl, draping it around Kim's shoulders. "Come along, dear," she said. "Let's get you back to the boarding house and out of this dreadful dress." The walk back was like a procession, with townsfolk offering quiet words of support. Children who had once stared at Kim's scars now smiled shyly, and women who had whispered behind their hands reached out to touch her arm in friendship. By evening, the boarding house kitchen glowed with warmth and fellowship. Kim insisted on cooking, despite the widow's protests. She moved with purpose between stove and table, preparing a hearty stew with dumplings. The familiar work seemed to settle her spirit. The dining room filled with those who had stood up for her, the clerk nervously polishing his spectacles, Eli sharing quiet words with Donald by the window, and the widow directing traffic with her usual efficiency. The aroma of fresh bread and bubbling stew drew everyone together like family. "I'll testify at the hearing," Widow Margaret declared, ladling seconds into Donald's bowl. "Shaw's bullied this town long enough. About time someone showed him what real strength looks like." Kim paused in her work, touched by the widow's fierce loyalty. "Thank you," she said softly. "All of you. I never thought I'd find such friendship here." As the evening wore on, guests began to depart. Eli clasped Kim's hand in both of his, speaking a brief blessing in Cherokee that brought tears to her eyes. The clerk promised to have all the paperwork ready for the hearing. Soon, only Donald remained, helping Kim clear away the dishes while the widow retired upstairs. They worked in comfortable silence until Kim spoke. "You're different than I thought, too. You know." Donald set down the plate he was drying. "How so?" "When I first saw you on the mountain, I thought you were just another man who'd try to control my fate." She smiled, touching the rough sleeve of his borrowed shirt. "Instead, you helped me reclaim it." Donald's weathered face softened. "Truth is, I never thought my heart could thaw again after losing my sister. Been frozen up there in the high country too long." He hesitated, then added, "You changed that. I told you I'm not who you think." Kim reminded him, her dark eyes holding his. "I'm more." "That you are," Donald agreed quietly. Their hands found each other across the wooden table, fingers intertwining naturally, as if they had always belonged together. But both moved carefully, aware of the tender new growth between them, like spring's first flowers pushing through melting snow. "It's getting late," Kim said finally, though she didn't pull away. "We should rest. Tomorrow will bring its own challenges." Donald nodded, reluctantly releasing her hand. "I'll bed down in the parlor. Make sure no trouble comes calling in the night." Kim gathered her shawl around her shoulders and paused at the bottom of the stairs. "Donald?" she called softly. When he turned, she continued, "Thank you for believing in me when no one else would." He tipped his head in acknowledgement, watching as she climbed to her room. Through the thin walls, he heard her voice lifted in quiet prayer, giving thanks for safety, justice, and new beginnings. Outside, snow began falling again, thick flakes drifting past the windows. They settled over Silverton like a blanket of peace, smoothing the day's rough edges and muffling all sound except the gentle crackle of the parlor fire. Donald settled into the armchair, rifle within reach, but his heart lighter than it had been in years. As he drifted towards sleep, Kim's soft prayers mingled with his own gratitude for the way faith had led him down from his solitary mountain and back into the warmth of human connection. The schoolhouse buzzed with tension 2 days later, its wooden desks pushed aside to make room for the county hearing. Morning light streamed through tall windows, catching dust motes that danced above the crowded benches. Kim sat straight-backed in the front row, her mother's locket gleaming at her throat. Donald stood quietly behind her, his presence steady as a mountain. Judge Harrison, borrowed from the circuit court, tapped his gavel on the teacher's desk. "This hearing will come to order," he announced, his voice carrying to the back of the room where Shaw lurked with his remaining men. The clerk rose, adjusting his spectacles with trembling fingers. He held Kim's deed carefully, as if handling something precious. "This document," he began, "dated 1873, grants to Thomas Whitmore and his heirs the water rights and accompanying lands of Spring Creek Valley." His voice grew stronger as he read the precise legal descriptions, the measurements, the witness signatures. One by one, witnesses came forward. Widow Margaret spoke of Kim's character and courage. The clerk testified about Shaw's attempts to intimidate him into losing the deed. Even gruff Mr. Peterson, who owned the largest cattle spread next to Shaw's, admitted reluctantly that Shaw had tried to buy his false testimony. "He offered me $500 to say the deed was forged," Peterson confessed, avoiding Shaw's murderous glare. "But my conscience wouldn't allow it." Shaw's fury finally erupted when Eli stepped forward. "You'll take the word of some Indian over a respected rancher?" he shouted, lunging to his feet. 2 deputies moved quickly to restrain him as Judge Harrison's gavel cracked sharply. "One more outburst, and you'll be held in contempt." The judge's ruling, when it came, rang with finality. "The deed is legitimate. The land and water rights belong to Miss Whitmore, as her father intended." Cheers erupted through the schoolhouse. Several women who had once shunned Kim now pressed forward to embrace her, apologies tumbling from their lips. Donald remained where he was, letting Kim have her moment of vindication. When the crowd finally thinned, Kim turned to face him before them all. "I couldn't have done this alone," she declared, her voice clear and strong. "Donald Boone saw me as a person when others saw only scars and prejudice. He gave me shelter when I was lost and stood beside me when I found my way." Later, in the boarding house parlor, Donald cleared his throat nervously. "That land needs a proper homestead built," he said. "I've got experience with cabin raising. If you'd allow me, I'd be honored to help." Kim's smile held both warmth and challenge. "I'd welcome your help," she replied, "but only if you'll build it as my partner, not my rescuer. We've both been alone too long." Donald's eyes grew damp as he nodded. "Partner," he agreed softly, reaching for her hand. "That's a sight better than being a lone mountain man." Late February sunshine warmed the mountain slopes as Donald and Kim rode toward Spring Creek Valley. Their horses' hooves crunched through patchy snow, following the winding trail that led to Kim's inherited land. The air held the first hints of coming spring, fresh and full of promise. "There," Kim pointed, her voice catching with emotion. "That's the spring Papa always said would sustain generations." Clear water bubbled from rocky ground, forming a steady stream that carved its way through the valley. Donald dismounted first, reaching up to help Kim from her saddle. Together they stood at the spring's edge, watching the water sparkle in the morning light. "Your father chose well," he said softly. "This land has good bones." They spent that first day clearing winter-broken branches and marking property lines. Kim showed Donald where the old fence posts had rotted, and together they began repairs. Their work fell into an easy rhythm, Kim holding posts steady while Donald drove them deep with measured strikes of the maul. "Reckon we ought to mark the spring proper," Donald suggested as afternoon shadows lengthened. He produced a wooden sign he'd carved in secret, reading Whitmore Spring. Kim traced the letters with trembling fingers. "It's perfect," she whispered, tears gleaming in her eyes. They planted the sign where everyone passing could see it. Word spread through town about their building plans. Within days, wagons began, arriving neighbors bringing tools, lumber, and willing hands. The widow Margaret came with food for the workers. Even Krusty Peterson showed up with his sons, muttering about making things right. The cabin rose steadily from the valley floor. Donald directed the work with quiet authority, showing others how to notch logs and fit them tight. Kim moved among the workers, offering water and thanks. Her scarred face lifted proudly to the sun. Eli visited often, blessing the construction with prayers in Cherokee and English. He taught Kim more of her mother's songs, their voices carrying across the valley as they worked. Donald found himself pausing sometimes just to listen, his heart full of wonder at how music could heal old wounds. When Sunday came, Kim walked into church wearing her mother's shawl, head held high. The morning light through stained glass caught her scars differently, now as marks of shame, but as proof of courage. As the congregation settled, Eli nodded encouragingly from his pew. Kim rose and moved to the front. "I'd like to share a hymn my mother taught me," she announced, her voice steady. "It's both Cherokee and English, speaking one truth in two tongues." She began softly, the Cherokee words flowing like the spring water itself. Then she shifted to English, the familiar words of amazing grace rising clear and strong. Donald joined from his pew, his deep voice supporting hers. Other voices followed, the harmony swelling until the little church seemed to glow with sound. After the service, they rode back to their nearly finished cabin. The evening air held the last chill of winter, but promised breath in every breeze. Donald lit the lamp they'd hung that morning, its warm light spilling through the single window onto the snow. They stood hand in hand, watching that gleam of home and hope. Kim's scars caught the lamplight, no longer a mark of loss, but a testament to survival. Donald's own hidden scars, the ones grief had carved inside him, felt lighter somehow, healed by this unexpected grace. "Remember when I told you I wasn't who you thought?" Kim asked softly. Donald squeezed her hand. "You were right. You're more than anyone thought, more than I dreamed possible when I found you in that storm." The lamp burned steady in their window, a beacon of welcome in the gathering dusk. Around them, the valley held their future, not as solitary souls, but as two hearts bound by faith, forged in fire, and made stronger by love. Thanks for spending a moment here with me. If this story touched you, let's keep this connection going. Hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.